returning to Capitol Hill this week with a laundry list of issues to tackle. At the top of the list, passing a government spending bill before funding runs out in just 2.5 weeks. Let's bring in Republican Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma. He's a member of the House Appropriations Committee and can help us understand how this is all going to work. Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning. You're very optimistic.
Oh, I'm expecting a lot out of this 5-minute segment from you.
Okay.
Okay, let's get to it. We have a graphic of all of the issues that you all have to tackle in the next couple of months. So we'll just go through it. The number one, pass the government spending bill, because this is the can that you guys are forever kicking down the road, and now you only have 2 weeks to keep the government running. Then, of course, there's what to do about the Dreamers. There's the president's infrastructure program that he sounds like he wants to tackle first. There's CHIP that protects the most vulnerable children in this country, that the president still wants to repeal Obamacare. Then there's what Paul Ryan has talked about, which is, reforming welfare and the entitlement programs. And then, of course, there's the midterm elections. Congressman, what do you want to do first?
Well, let's start. First things first is to fund the government. And frankly, the appropriators are pretty good at this. We did it in April, over $1 trillion bill, very bipartisan, and it has to be bipartisan. It takes 60 votes in the United States Senate to pass the spending bill. So two parties have to work together. The first thing we need is for the president, the speaker, the majority leader, the two minority leaders to agree on what's called a top line number. After that, we break it into 12 different bills, and that's what funds the government. But they have to agree on the top line. They haven't been able to come to that agreement yet.
I mean, this is why optimism may be misplaced, because there are sticking points. There seem to be a lot of sticking points. So how are you all going to get on board?
Well, the big one is that there has to be something in it for everybody in what's a bipartisan deal. And the way forward is pretty obvious. The Republicans want to do a major defense buildup. Actually, both parties voted for that in the National Defense Authorization Act. So there's going to be more money there above the cap level. And the Democrats want in exchange for that to get more money on the non-defense side of discretionary spending. So that's the deal. They just have to decide what the appropriate amounts are. And again, the appropriators know how to get this done pretty quickly once there's an agreement at the top. So the two parties are actually used to working together in the appropriations process, but leaders have to agree to allow appropriators to do their job. After that, you got to move on the CHIP program.
Yeah, let's talk about CHIP.
Again,
I want to talk about that because, listen, I mean, if you can't protect, the nation's most vulnerable children, this is the Children's Health Insurance Program. The sticking point for Democrats seems to be the money not coming from this preventative care fund. So why can't Republicans just agree to keep funding that?
Well, they actually can, and they have so far. We've continued to fund it on a short-term basis. The House has passed a bill. I think it's a good bill. The Senate's got to pass a bill so we can go to conference. It doesn't have to be our bill. They just have to come to an agreement, put together a bill. The two sides will go to conference, and then we'll iron out the differences.
Why isn't the Senate? Why hasn't the Senate done
You're going to have to ask the Senate for that. I mean, look, their rules that they adopt make it very difficult to move forward, and they have to move forward in a bipartisan way. I respect that. That's up to them, but just get the job done, pass a bill. I think part of this was everybody was so focused on tax reform, we forget the importance of day-to-day governance. And, that's what really impacts most Americans every single day. So let's get this done. Not that hard to do. Again, we've passed it to the House. We had Democratic support. It'll be a different bill coming out of the Senate. Then you sit down and make a deal. So not that hard.
Well, I like, again, your optimism and making it sound so simple. But let's talk about the Dreamers, okay? Because that's another one that all sides say there needs to be a fix for these kids who were brought here through no choice of their own. But if the president insists on funding an actual wall as part of this deal, Democrats say that they can't go along with that. So what's the simple fix?
Well, I don't know why you can't go along with border security. Look, on this one, that polls over 80%. People on all sides want it. We can disagree about the wall, but we had the largest increase in border security money in April in over a decade. We can do that again. And some places walls make sense, some places they may not. But we can make a big step in the right direction. And again, I don't consider these young people a problem, but the issue with DACA is because you didn't have adequate border control in the first place. That's why you have all these young folks here. And they ought to get legal status. my view, but the obvious trade-off is stronger border security. President's right on that one. Democrats need to come around, or, they may decide they want a political issue. But in the meantime, we're putting hundreds of thousands of people at risk that, in my view, shouldn't be at risk.
I mean, what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer say is that when they sat down with the president to talk about DACA, they thought they had a deal and that the president was on board with protecting Dreamers. And then later, he inserted the funding for the border wall, which they said wasn't part of it, and they felt sort of hoodwinked.
Well, I wasn't privy to that conversation, obviously, and I can't speak to that directly. But I'll say this. Anybody that thinks you're going to get an immigration fix without enhanced border security is just whistling past a political graveyard. Look, you need to do both at the same time. And, again, the devil's in the details on these things, but we managed to do this in April on a $1 trillion spending bill, increased spending on the border. Most Democrats voted for that. We can do it again here, but they have to sit down, and each side has to not try to score political points, but actually solve the problem. I think there's a lot of credit to go around here if they can just hit the sweet spot.
I know you have a lot of thoughts on how to handle all of this domestic legislation, but I just have to ask you about everything that seems to be blowing up internationally. The president has tweeted support for the Iranian protests. What do you think the U.S. should do next?
Well, I think he's right to have done that. I think we need to get the Europeans speaking up. This is one where I think we ought to look at perhaps at reimposing sanctions if they're brutal to their own people. Certainly, we ought to do what we can to try and facilitate communication as the regime in Tehran, shuts off things like Twitter and the internet. So, but that's honestly the extent of it. The future of Iran is really in the hands of the Iranian people. We need to be supportive. They're trying to do the right thing, and frankly, they're absolutely right to make the point that this is a regime wasting billions of dollars on foreign terrorist activity and in being involved in other countries. Those dollars ought to be spent to improve the lives of the Iranian people. So hopefully somebody in Tehran will wake up and decide it'd be better to be a peaceful partner to countries in the region as opposed to engaging in endless wars against Sunni states.
Congressman Tom Cole, thanks so